Hey everybody, welcome to Lens Workflow number 1. This video we're going to go over working inside of Nuke with the new lens distortion node. These content files can be downloaded if you're a member of my Patreon, so check out my Patreon link if you're interested. But I'm going to go over some of this footage here, and we're going to just go through the whole workflow. So there is a new lens distortion node inside of Nuke. So if I go over here and type lens distortion here, you can see that the new lens distortion comes off with a parentheses ST map. It's vastly different than what we had before. If you want to see the old one, you can come over here and do all plugins update and then type in lens distortion with the letter L, and you can see the different, here's what we had before. We had lens distortion. You would actually do, image-based analysis, grid analysis, and then line analysis. So they made it a little bit more robust in here. It is by default set to ST map, and a lot of people get confused by that. They're kind of like, what's that all about? I'll go over that in a minute. So we have 2 files in here that come with the content folders. Again, if you're a member of my Patreon, you can see I have a whole workflow here. We're using the Blackmagic 4K Pocket. And I went ahead and shot this, shot a whole bunch of plates here. So if I put this to input, you can see that we have all types of fun here. We got the un-distort plate for 8mm SLR Magic. These are all the lenses I currently have for my Blackmagic. I'm actually in the process of getting an anamorphic lens right now to do anamorphic tracking, which will be coming up, and all that fun stuff. But as you can see, these are all spherical-based lenses, specifically a really nice Lumix 12-35 zoom. So this specific shot, we actually used the 12-35 zoom. You can see all this footage is 4K DCI, which is, even though this was shot 4K, I down converted it to 2K DCI, which is 2048 by 1080. If you want to know what size the, if you want to look at what is 4K DCP or DCI, both the 4096 by 2160, it's slightly widescreen version, as you can see here. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of lenses here, different millimeter lenses that I did here. So usually you want to get a nice file here, and I'll include this in the actual downloadable file. You can actually print this up. I would go to a print shop near your neighborhood and print something up about the size of a 32-inch, TV screen or something. You want to get it pretty big so that you can do different sizes. You can see there's big squares inside of small squares, or small squares inside of big squares. The whole purpose is that as you start to zoom in, you want to make sure that you're not zooming up on a giant square. You want to have smaller squares. That's why they have the center here. And this data is going to read in to get rid of the lens distortion, which is very important to do if we're going to be going back and forth with Maya or doing any sort of cleanup workflow. We got to get the barrel lens distortion out. That's that curvy stuff you can see here. So again, if you just kind of poke through here, you can see the different lenses and how as we start to get longer and longer lenses here, like for instance, this is 18mm, right? Go to 25, things starting to look more square. There's less barrel distortion. You're going to see the most distortion on the edges. When you get to about, in this case, 25mm. Now, we got to remember the actual camera itself, the Blackmagic, is a 2 times crop factor. So really, when you're looking at a 25mm, you're really looking at 50mm because it kind of doubles it up. And in doing so, that has everything to do with the field of view. And in doing so, the more you zoom in on something, the less lens distortion, barrel lens distortion that you will see. You will still have perspective distortion, as I'll talk about a little bit later. So you can see I'm basically zooming up on that little square that at the time was right here. So you can see I'm kind of just zooming in. I also had an 8mm lens, which surprisingly by SLR Magic, this is a very cheap lens. It's only like 150 bucks. But it's so awesome because it has no lens distortion barely. I mean, it's really amazing for a lens that small. So and so wide. That's a crazy wide fisheye lens, by the way. So we're not dealing with that. We want to get to the frame where, again, I have this set to input. I got this set over here, and we're going to get to the frame where it says 12mm. I only shot these really quick, so I'm gonna pull this away. I might use my arrow keys, and I'm going to get to this frame right here. I only got like literally 1 frame I could track here. You can track multiple frames, which might be helpful. Some people will take a grid and put it on a slider and move towards the actual grid a little bit, and then where you can track maybe 5 or 6, or basically do a track for 4 or 5 frames to really get an idea of lens distortion. It's very helpful when you do shoot this to try to get the lines at the top, bottom, left, and right of the frame as close to the edge as possible. So like right here, it's very beneficial. And then over here, you can see that it would have been nice to get the line down here, but you're never going to get it perfect. So it's going to start to assess the lens distortion based on the connection of these points. You can even see the flaws of these lenses when you do shoot this kind of high contrast situation. You can see the chromatic aberration, which is an artifact of the separation of the channels here, where you can see like this kind of like green and magenta tinge on the edges, but in the center it's not so bad, right? So, but as you get closer to the edges, you'll start to see a lot of that chromatic aberration, just based on the quality of the lens. And this is a very good quality lens, believe it or not. But it's the Lumix 12-35. Which is an excellent lens. And you can see if I just go back to the 8mm here, let's go ahead and jump on to the 8mm lens. And you'll probably see more flaws here. Let's see, actually, it's got a different tinge of a chromatic aberration, but again, it's just all those glass elements not aligning really well because this is the curviest part of the actual lens, the actual outside area. But that's okay because we're not really worried about that. We're really worried about just establishing this bow. So I chose to shoot this with a shot that is 12mm. So let me get to that shot here. Okay, so pull back. There it is, 12mm. I want to make sure it looks good. Now I shot at an f-stop of 8 so that I would have a lot of field of view. Blasted it with one of my lights so I wouldn't have to worry about things being in focus and out of focus, even though I'm kind of focusing just one plane. I shot it at the highest quality possible. Again, this is down converted from RAW or BRAW. Blackmagic RAW to a QuickTime 264 2048 by 1080. So there has been some compression and some scaling down here that has occurred in this process. That's just for you guys to download the files really quick. So here we are. We got this nice image here that is the official 12mm. So we're going to go ahead and create a lens distortion node. Now, not the lens distortion L, but the lens distortion transform if you did that update. And you'll know you got the right one because you'll see this parentheses that says ST map. Okay, so we're going to plug that in while we're sitting on this frame. Now notice, because I created the lens distortion node at this specific frame, it has created a keyframe at this specific frame. If you don't see that keyframe, or you're having a problem if you're trying to hit detect and nothing's happening, delete your lens distortion node to recreate it on the frame, and you definitely need at least one keyframe before you do any detection. Okay. So because we have done this, we've actually created a keyframe, okay? So what you can do in this circumstance is you can do multiple keys here. For instance, if I go to the next frame, like that, I can add a key, and add a key, and add a key. I don't have any motion in my shot, though, so I'm going to stay on my frame, which is right now frame 50, what is that, 52? I've already had a keyframe, so if you don't have a keyframe, you have to make sure that you have a keyframe by clicking Make a Keyframe. Otherwise, all of this other stuff will not work. All right, so let's go ahead and analyze. We're going to base it on grids. There's also links and features, so we're going to get into that a little bit later. But analyze, and we'll go ahead and use the grids because this is a grid pattern we shot, which is something that you definitely want to shoot. You want to print this stuff out. You want to plaster it to your wall so it's perfectly flat, no waves or no unloose tape on the edges to create any sort of like ripples in the actual entire piece of this. You want this as flat as a pancake. So it's currently set to ST map, but I'm going to go ahead and analyze now that I have a keyframe, hit detect, and voila, if I go ahead and hit D to disable the background here, you can start to see the backdrop. Now, this is defaulting to 2K, so what I have to do is click nothing over here and hit the letter S for settings. Go to my full-size format, and I want to set this to the default of our files, which is 2K DCP 2048 by 1080. Now that I've done that, let's go back into the thing. You can see that we have a nice outline. Let me hit D to disable here, so you can see what it's done. It's done its best to create features, which are these little X's, and then lines between the features by connecting them. It's actually done a really good job. So it looks for that contrast. It knows it's looking for grids. It cannot make a connection from here to here because there's no line to grab a hold of. But that's okay. You can see we've lost some data here because we don't have that line. That's why I was telling you guys that it's good to have these type of things set up right here. So right now it kind of isn't establishing a line between here. If you haven't noticed already, there's a whole bunch of features over here that you can actually force the computer to compute. So I can come over here and say add a line, and I could start connecting the dots. So I can click here, click here, click here, click here, and click here. That'll actually help my solve a little bit better. Okay, so you can see if I kind of take a look. It's the computer wasn't absolutely sure on that, but you can kind of ensure it by telling it, you know, good to go. Now there's a couple of features in here. If you want, you can actually come in here and grab these features. They're not really going to play a big part. Hit the delete key. You see anything that looks a little bit funky, you're like, ugh, it doesn't look right. The computer's going to figure out most of this stuff, so I wouldn't freak out about it. There we go. And let's see, let's try this guy, this guy, this guy. You don't usually have to do this. I'm just kind of showing you guys. And again, don't be afraid to like disable and re-enable and just see. And then you can see there's a connection loss here. You can add features, which are the little stars, or you can add lines. And if there's features, they'll connect the two lines. Okay. All right. So now that we have established, you can see it's a little bit of crooked. My tripod was sort of like not balanced, so it's kind of like cockeyed to the one side. So let's come to the lens distortion node, and everything's good to go. We've done the detection, now we do the solve. So the reality is it's a three-step process. It's a keyframe or multiple keyframes if you wish. Detect, depending on if you want to use lines or features, and then solve is the third step. Okay, so let's hit solve. Nothing happens. Everything stays the same. Now you can see that we have a warning sign in the way that we usually do 3D tracking, which is green and red. And also we have, we got some yellow marks here, but red is basically the tolerance. So you can see over here we have this threshold here, error threshold. Control the error threshold, decrease for a closer fit, but the risk of overfitting. So you can see as I start to take this and increase it or decrease it, I can kind of call areas that might be questionable. Like it's actually questioning this area right here, okay? From which, if I want to, and I don't really think I need to because I'm pretty confident these are good, but I'll do it anyway, you can hit reject. And that'll reject that area, and then you can go ahead and resolve, okay? So very much like 3D tracking, except you're using points to get all this done. Again, nothing is being undistorted yet, so we're going to take the mode and put it over here to undistort. And now you can see what I call the overscan, okay, or the slack. This is being pulled out like a canvas, but data is being lost. So you can see it's being stretched and it's sitting outside here, all right? And you can see over here. So if we go into Maya, if we go into Houdini and we want to, take this scene, okay, we definitely want to render out some slack or overscan, because what's going to happen eventually, and I'll demonstrate it by copying and pasting this lens distort node and plugging it in right directly and switching this back to a re-distort node, is it's going to re-distort it back. But the problem with the re-distortion back, okay, is the fact that it's going to repeat the last pixel here, okay? There needs to be data sitting outside here in order for this to work right, okay? Because what happens at the undistort node and what happens at your renders inside of Maya is that there's no information out here to squeeze in. So commonly, like it's mentioned in the world of VFX, is we're dealing with a non-linear world, and we're bringing it into the linear world of the computer. So we have barrel lens distortion in the real world, which is this kind of curvedness. If I hit tab to show you the 3D view, we have this sort of reality of, perspective, but without the bowing here. There's no bowing. So we have to remove the bowing so that the tracking fits into the linear way of the actual, 3D environment. There is perspective distortion, okay, but there is no barrel lens distortion. So the workflow is, okay, you're going to take this undistort footage. I'm going to copy and paste the undistort version. And you're going to plug this in. And keep in mind, if you go out and buy a 12 to 35 Lumix, you can't use these grids, okay, because your lens was specifically designed by the manufacturer a certain way. So it might have a little bit of a different imperfection on it. So you will have to shoot your own plates with your own lenses because every lens is unique. So here's the footage of, let's go ahead and just show you. Here's the footage and I'll put this to input so we can see it back up. You can see if I just go ahead and play through of, this is like my condo right outside, and so you can see we got some bricks. It's really, really dark out and so forth. Again, this was a 4K DCI Blackmagic Pocket 4K footage, shot handheld on my Lumix 12-35, and I downconverted it to H.264, so it's no longer RAW, and I also downconverted it to 2K DCI, which is, again, just, you know, the resolution is 2048 by 1080. Okay. All right, so if you can see the lens distortion node, I go ahead and attach that to the scene. Now you can see that the little pillar here is actually perfectly straight. If I disable this, you can see that we have that barrel lens distortion. Okay, this is now ready to be tracked to be brought into the 3D linear world of the computer. Okay, the only problem is we have slack sitting on the outside that's been stretched and cropped and clipped. Okay. Eventually, what you're going to do is you're going to take this footage tracked inside of Maya or Houdini, render out the CG with this plate, but you're going to render it with a little bit of slack, okay, depending on how much you need, and we're going to establish that. And then in here, you're going to take that, and I'll copy and paste the re-distort node and squeeze it back. Now, the slack will be there. In this case, there is no slack, and hence you're getting this repeated pixel along the edge. If you kind of take a look at I'll put my viewer to the first frame here and to the last frame, and you can see it's exactly the same. There's a slight little bit of movement. There's been resampling, that's why it's blurrier, which is not good, and this is why you would never, you would actually just comp over your original. You don't want to comp over a resampled version. But you can see there's missing data here because the data has been squeezed back into the center, okay? And that's what's going to happen to your CG. You're going to have a monster or something, and that monster is going to be squeezed. So just to give you an example, let's pretend we're making a monster. We rendered a monster in CG, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just output RGBA, and let's make a gingerbread monster here. Okay, that's a horrible, horrible drawing. Okay, gingerbread monster, ooh, scary. Okay, so there it is, right? And what you're going to do is you're actually going to render out that gingerbread monster in CG, and you're going to take lens distortion, and you're going to shrink it in, okay? See how it's shrunk in? You're going to take the re-distortion node information, shrink it in, then you're going to hit M for merge, and merge that onto your plate shot. Now, again, if you don't have the extra slack to squeeze in, you're going to get this, a repeat of the last pixel. You can see, I kind of take a look at this right here. And let's see here. So you can see we're just repeating the last pixel. Now the good thing about these Roto nodes is you can actually go to Clip 2 and set this to Bounding Box, which actually keeps the overscan and then squeezes it in. So you can see the difference as it gets squeezed in. See that? It's getting proper and there's no clipping going on. So the data, the extra data is there and it gets squeezed in. So in the midst of all these processes, usually in wide angle lenses between 8mm and 30 to 35mm, you're going to have to do this workflow. You should be doing this workflow even with 50mm and all that, because there is slight pincushion distortion in there and so forth. But you can see that this is what we're going to be doing. This is the workflow for the CG. Okay, so we're going to be exporting this here, okay, or I should say this, okay, to a write node. And we'll render out a couple JPEGs, a JPEG sequence to bring into a scene, as well as the actual camera solve for the scene. So that is pretty much lens distortion. But the question is, how much overscan will you need? Can you assess that? Yes, you can. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and just show you that here's the lens distortion that I did. And I found a nice little quick way of figuring out what percentage of lens distortion or extra slack you need to take out. So if I go here to the un-distort and make this a re-distort node, we can see just by going to it, we're getting that clipping effect. The cool thing is on the un-distort node, you have this option here called, a couple options. You have adjust format and you have add pixels. The add pixels is going to create the extra slack overscan. Okay, so I'm going to start adding pixels, and you can start to see what's happening is we're actually growing and growing and growing out, and as I continue to bring this up, eventually, see we still have some banding right here. I'm going to keep cranking this up. I'll take my middle mouse scroll wheel and put it on the 1 here, or maybe the 0, and I'll keep moving it until everything's gone. I don't want to go any further until everything's gone. Now I'm going to check all the other edges to make sure that everything was included. Looks good. Yep. Good. Okay, so now if you take a look, if you just kind of back up a little bit, you can see this is basically the amount of overscan you're going to need to render out inside of Maya or Houdini. So instead of rendering 2K DCP, okay, which is 2048 by 1080, you will have to render 2188 by 1220, okay, inside of whatever program you're using. And then you'll do a whole, just a reformat, recrop tool later on to kind of get this up and maintain this bounding box information so that the squeeze occurs. Keep in mind that you're seeing a lot of overscan, which might be discouraging. Like, oh my gosh, I got to render that much more information. If we were dealing with any of these other lenses in here, okay, like the 35 or the 18mm, we'd probably only have to render about that much, probably like this much around. So we are ready to actually track our shot. So I'm going to remove this re-distort node for now. Okay. Actually, we already have it over here, so I'll just delete it. So I can now take this un-distort node, plug it into my scene. And again, you want to double check to make sure that you didn't track the wrong sequence. You might have tracked the wrong footage in here of a different lens. You know you did it right because you can see that the lines are perfectly straight. See that? It has a sort of a, I forgot the term, echo-rectangular or something. But you can see all the lines are perfect straight perspective lines. There is perspective distortion, but in general you can see everything looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and make a camera tracker node. And we're going to track this sucker. So I'll throw this in right here. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and jump over here, and we're going to plug in a couple options here. We don't have any masking, there's no person, there's nothing in our scene that's moving around real crazy, otherwise you'd want to plug in a mask with this mask plugin right here, and then just plug it to source alpha. But we're not going to do that. Camera motion is free camera, you can see it's a moving camera. If it were just on a tripod, you choose rotation only. There currently is no lens distortion on it, which is perfectly, real. You can also, you could have it established on lens distortion just on the shots itself. It can do actually 3D tracking and figure out what the distortion is by itself by kind of comparing, which is another way of doing it. But the most robust and reliable way is shooting these grids, because you get every little corner is properly assessed, so to speak. So anyway. Let's take a look. Focal distance. We know this is approximate constant, and the focal distance is 12mm. There we go. And the film back size, we're going to go online to look up our film back size, which is our the actual millimeter of our sensor size. So our sensor size for the Blackmagic is a lot wider than, say, a GH5, which has a 17.3 by 13. This is 18.96 by 10. Okay. So let's go ahead and just plug that in. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and put that to 10. Very important that you get all this data figured out ahead of time while you're here. Okay, so tracking data. We're going to go over to our settings here, turn on preview features. And you can see we're not able to track a lot. So in order to track a little bit better, I'm going to add a grade node past the camera tracker here. And you'll see I'm going to put my properties bin to 2, and I'll make sure my grade node and my camera tracker node are selected. And as I take my grade node and start to bring up the gain, you can see I'm getting more information. If I come over here to my detection threshold, I can bring that down a little bit to grab more points, and then I'm going to kind of crank this up to 300, just so I collect more points. And again, the more I take this gain, and I start to bring up the gamma a little bit, you can start to see that it's going to start picking up on all these goodies. So you can see it's less light, there's less data to collect. So you want to get a good balanced amount of points, and you want to get it as much into the frame all the way throughout the entire shot. Alright, so with that said, we are ready to track. So you can turn off preview features, and we'll come over here, and we will start tracking. So now you can see it's tracking contrast points. You would almost consider these to be features, right? The features that you can draw, which I'm going to show in a demo a little bit later, which is in case you didn't shoot an actual grid, you can actually come in here and use features and lines to establish your own un-distortion workflow. Because sometimes you're on set and you basically don't have the time to shoot grids, or the lenses have to get back to the shops or are stored away. When I was working on the feature film thrill ride, we were constantly pushing our DP, even during the 2 months of the feature film being shot, that they still would never give us any time to get a hold of the lenses and actually shoot grids, which we finally did. They were very expensive prime lenses, rented out from a rental house in Chicago. But we did finally get grids for everything. And it's very important to shoot those things. Get them early if you can, before they start filming. Again, I think we had about 5 or 6 primes, and we had 1 zoom lens that they used. So we had to shoot all the, basically, if in this case this is a zoom lens we're doing for tracking, and you got to figure out from the supervisor on set, the ACs or whatever. Find out the log sheets, see what different millimeters they shot at, or what favorites they shot with the zoom, so you don't have to do every single millimeter of a zoom. So you want to find out all the different ranges and actually get those basically set up. Okay, so track forward and track back. We've got a lot of spaghetti right now. That's good. And now we're going to go over here and do a solve. So hit the solve on here. We have an error rate of 1.17. They'll tell you in the industry that this sucker, or so the per frame error rate should be below 1.0. Okay, so you can see that the points that are not so hot in regards to reliability, but are assessed in the actual solve, are red, and the green ones are, again, good and also assessed into the actual project. Anything that's yellow was basically ignored. This was obviously something that was my shadow, and because of that, it wasn't put in the solve. The stuff in red is a very low error, a very high error rate, but was put in the solve. So you can come over here if you wish to your tracker, and I've done this many times in other tutorials, so this is all just repeat. So you can see I could say delete rejected, which are the amber tracks, which are right here. Oops, sorry, delete rejected was the red tracks. So those were under a specific limbo bar, so error max, max error. Anything that was basically above the max error actually got called. That was the red markers. And the delete unsolved, the ones that weren't included into the actual solve, you can click that, and then goodbye to the yellow or orange tracks, I should say. Boom. So with that, if that's the case now, this should give us a little bit more reliable solve. So I'll just say update solver and update the shot, and let's see what error rate we get now. We got a higher error rate now, yay. That's good enough, honestly. I've seen error rates as high as 2.4. It's still are pretty good solves. It's a very dark scene, very blurry scene. My scene's out of focus, actually. I ran out the door and filmed this. So I'm not really worried about something looking too spiffy. This is all for learning cases. So, okay, now that we have actually done that, we're going to come in here and do a scene and say create. So now spits out a camera tracker cloud, a camera, and a scene. So I'm going to put my viewer to the scene, which pops me into 3D mode. I'm going to back up. And you can see that we have the wall there, okay, which is my condo wall. And over here is the trees and the shrubs, and so forth. So you can see if I use my hotkeys Z, X, and C, that, the angle is not exactly right. So I'm going to first try to come over here put my viewer back to my camera tracker node, which puts me back into the 2D mode. And let's go ahead and try to establish my origin. So my origin I'm going to establish probably down here by the rocks. I'll right-click this and say set origin. And I could also try, if I can, to find a vertical up and down, which I'm not going to. I'm just going to use my side views to orientate this. So if I go ahead and take a look at the camera, and the only way to really do that here is to put your viewer into the scene node, look through the camera, put your viewer to it, you can see that we have the origin now down there. If I go ahead and hit play, it has the, again, no barrel lens distortion, but definitely perspective distortion. Okay. So again, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to try to orientate this. If I go to look at the top view, X, Z, and C, so C is actually looking from above. The origin's right there. It's going to pivot around the origin that I established. I'm going to go over to my C node. I'm going to rotate in the Y. I'm going to grab this and hit my scroll wheel, rotate it around until I orientate it to the real world space, which I want to get my condo wall up against. Probably like right there, I'm guessing. So you'll see it as you kind of, you'll feel it as you kind of see it. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can rotate this just a little bit better. And also maybe translate it. Let's translate it over. So I'll translate it in the X direction. So you're going to have to put a value like 0.01 on here, and then take the 1 with your wheel and use your middle mouse scroll wheel and move it over. Now it's established right on the line. So now that I've done that, let's take a look. And the way to look at this is to take your viewer. I'm going to put 1 to the grade node, 2 to the scene node. So again, grab this, hit the letter number 1, alphanumeric 1. Take the scene node, alphanumeric 2, and I'll put my properties bin to 1 for now. And I'm going to use a slap comp over. So I'm going to choose scene 1, stack, over, grade node. I'm going to look to the camera and lock to the camera. Use my middle mouse scroll wheel to get my framing. If your points are too big, you can come to your camera tracker cloud and bring those points down and up if you wish. And now we can go ahead and hit play, and now we have a nice tracked scene. Let's go ahead and hit the space bar and hit H to full frame this and just see how this looks. Now you can't judge this until you cache it. It's going to jump around visually, so you might get worried and think your track is bad. But again, if you just chill out and let this cache through, you'll find that you probably have a decent track. If you have jumping or jittering, you have a bad solve. If you have any floating, the points are actually not in the right place. They're probably either too close to camera or too far from camera. So you can see we got a really, really nice solve here. Everything feels pretty good. We have that, these points got a little confused because it's looking through a window, so that's why it's a bit odd. But right here, everything here feels pretty good. Feels like a good, solid solve. Again, so one way to kind of refine your solve is, again, I've done this before in many tutorials. You can take a model builder node, plug that in. The source footage, I'll put the grade node in. The camera, I'll plug the camera in. I'll put my viewer to the motion builder, double click it, make sure it's there. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and make a card. Just go ahead and drag that out. And we are currently in the alignment mode. So I'm going to find things that are squarish. And we'll put this like right there. And I'll put this like right here. So I'm kind of following, trying to follow the line here up to here. And then I'll come over here. And it's gonna be hard for me to guess to where this is, but if I can kind of take a look at the brick and mortar here, I can kind of tell where I need to be. So I'm gonna put this right, let's see here, let's try that right there. And as you start to get these closer, these purple points will get closer to the white yellow points, and that's how you know that you're actually, things are actually looking good. Okay, you can see as I do this, so I move this back and forth, it's sort of telling me, like, get this closer to, it's almost instinctively knows that this is where this point should be. Same thing over here. You can see as I move further away, the point's kind of like telling me, like, over here, dummy. So I'm going to move my way up. I'm going to kind of bring up my viewer gamma so I can kind of see things a little bit better. And yeah, it looks pretty good. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and move a couple frames over to establish parallax. And then I'm going to grab one of these points and click it. It'll constrain it to here. And you can see it's not kicking in just yet. Let's see if I can kind of... Looks like I got a problem here. Yeah, I got a problem. See, when you get issues like this is when it's like, oh, it ain't working. So whenever I get the issue, I delete it and I restart. Okay, so let me go ahead and create another one of these squares like that. And again, there's not much for me to go on here. That's the scary part about all this. And let's see if I start like right here. Probably choose a frame that's not motion blurred, but too late. And I'll just move my way maybe like right there. And I'll move straight down. Maybe something like that. And then establish this line right here. Probably to be like right there, I'm guessing. And right there. And right there. Okay. So let's just move a little bit. And this should sort of snap. See how it snapped as I moved it around? See that? You just move a couple points. You don't even have to move all of them. You can kind of pull this one a little bit if you wish. Get that established. But you see how just making 2 keyframes will be pretty much established. Okay, so let me just hit spacebar, full frame it. Make sure this isn't drifting. If it's drifting, it means that it's not actually in the proper 3D place. And again, you can't judge it until you cache it. When you cache it, you'll be able to say, okay, I know this is sticking. And I can just stop and just, you know, for some reason I'm getting a little bit of a slowdown here. It's probably because I have all this stuff turned on, so I'm going to turn that off. Just stick with Motion Builder node and let this cache through. And I don't know, I'm starting to get a slowdown. I don't know why. It looks pretty solid. It could be off a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to switch over to edit mode and right click and choose edges, and I'm going to grab shift select these edges right here, and you can see if I just grab this yellow line or red line, I can drag this out. Now this is dragging from the normals direction, so this actually might be off, and the way to do that and check that is to plug this model builder into your scene node, put your viewer to the scene node, look at it from the top view, and you can start to see the points are off, so I'm going to move those over a little bit. And that's the beauty of this, is I can grab points and just cheat a little bit and just move these onto the 3D mesh that is the points. So it's not going to be perfect, but we're not here to demonstrate anything too crazy. Let me jump over to my camera and lock to it. So now this should be pretty spot on. So I bet if I just let this play through, again, you can see it looks like it's jittering and all that. So it looks like it's pretty solid. Okay, so I purposely put this piece outside of here to demonstrate lens distortion and re-distortion. Okay, I'm going to take the model builder node and export some geometry. So I'll say select geometry and say bake. So I get a card, which basically is the card itself. I'm going to unplug this model builder from the scene node. And you can see we have the model builder node. I'll plug that in. I'm going to make a color bar here. There she is. Plug them in. And now we can go ahead and add a scanline render. 3D. And I'll put my I'll plug my camera in like this. So I have my object to my scene node, my camera to my camera. Come to my scanline render node, and I'll probably put this up to samples to 2, just so that I get some motion blur. I can adjust the shutter a little bit later. And if we take a look at the scanline and hit spacebar, you can see we have the rendered scene. Hit the A for alpha. I don't like these tracker points, camera tracker. I'm going to hit D to disable them. But you can see I have basically a CG render. This would come from Maya, this would come from Houdini. We have a little bit of motion blur there as the scene moves through the shot. So if I can see it like that. So I can up the samples if I wish. And then I can change the shutter, the amount of motion blur. We're going to leave that down for now. You would have to match that to the 180 degrees that I shot on the day outside. You can basically judge that by looking at the motion blur itself. For now, I'm going to take these samples down pretty low, just for demonstration purposes. So this would be the render that you brought in from Maya or Houdini, but you would have an actually overscanned information on here. All right. So at this point, let's bring our CG over here, or just our backplate, I should say. And instead of this Roto, we are going to plug in our lens distortion. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and see what happens. There's no data there, so it's repeating the last pixel. All right. Thankfully, the Scanline render actually has a option here for overscan. So you see overscan, it's going to expand out. You can see it's rendering out more. So I'll just push it even more, and then it's squeezed in. So you can see what's happening here. The lens distortion is squeezing it in. So we have to keep cranking to get more slack, probably as much as we had before, right? Which was around 170 or whatever. And now we get that return of the curve. See the curve? Okay, so here's the before, here's the after. If you go to a previous shot, you can see, you know, straight perspective line, curve established. So we have this shot here with this, okay, and this is our original, and we just comp on top of it. We don't take the unconvert or the version of it that's undistorted and re-distort it, then comp it. Just take your original, merge it onto the re-distorted. So the re-distorted CG on top of the original distorted plate. So I'll go ahead and plug that in. There we go. I'm going to take the merge node and take the opacity down a little bit so you guys can see how well this matches up or not. And now we have established proper distortion. Now, I probably could use an edge blur for my CG. I could also probably add a soften. People always add a soften to their CG or something. Okay, so that kind of helps a little bit. So let's full frame this and hit play and just play it back and cache it and see how it looks. We got the motion blur in there. So a lot of this can be used in 3D based clean plating. This is imperfect. You can see I probably have to move my geometry back a little bit. It's kind of floating a little bit up outside there, but so there you go, folks. And you want to look for any weird movement on here that would not look like it's sticking. That will depend on the geometry actually sitting within those floating points, that point cloud. It might be off a little bit, but in general, it's looking pretty solid, like I said. And lens distortion has been taken into account. In the next lessons, we're going to be jumping into the workflow for setting up Overscan in Maya and Houdini, just so that you're kind of aware of that. But before we conclude, I'd like to take a look again by I'll just take the footage here, and let's say you didn't shoot an actual distortion plate. So I'll put another lens distortion node on it, creates a key basically where I'm at. I'm going to put this and just double click this for the new distortion. Let's say you didn't shoot a grid like I showed before. Well, again, you have the option here of playing through your shots and looking for what you knew on the set to be straight lines. So I'm going to bring up my brightness here. And we know that this is straight. We know that these brick and mortar lines are roughly straight, like this window straight. This is really a good helpful model right here. So you want to get at least 4 lines, and I'll just come in here and you can see the different options. I usually just start by adding features. So I'll add a feature. I can take a feature there and just move down here as accurately as I possibly can. The more points, the better. And it'll give you more of a quadratic, like just a fall off general. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then we got this perspective line. Again, you want to look for stuff that's closer to the edges because most of the distortion is not in the center, it's on the outsides. So I can come in here and click here, click here, click here, click here. And I'm guessing at that point, all right. And I could also scrub through my footage, right? But before I do that, I want to connect these lines so I don't get lost. So you can come over here to select lines. I'm sorry, not select lines. You want to come over here to add lines, and this will connect the dots. So just go ahead and connect these by, it'll kind of snap to them. Once you're done, you can hit enter. And then you can just make another one. And then hit enter. So you want to kind of just play through your footage here, right? And see if we can kind of see, like you can see at this frame we have, you know, established lines. But I can go further in, see if I can get that bench down at the bottom there. And this time I'm just going to draw lines. So it's going to go straight to lines. It creates features and lines at the same time. So you can see as I draw this, it's just doing this. Right. And let's draw one like right here. This is all guesswork, by the way. This is why it's not very reliable. You're not getting every corner. Okay, so that's that. And see if we can find something else that might help us. I don't know, maybe this here. I'm going to make this really bad, so just let it be. Okay, so we have all these different things, and now you can see, do we want to base it by features? Links, we'll just leave it by features or whatever. You can actually do features and detect. I'll talk about that later. Or you can just hit solve, okay? So right now it's set to ST map. We're going to go to un-distort, and it took the information, and you can see that it did a pretty decent job. You know, how accurate is that to the original? Well, I could put my viewer to this one and my viewer to the original un-distort here. Pretty close, but not 100%. Okay, one was done more accurately with grids. Okay, and finally the last. Let's go ahead and put this up here for you. But I'll go ahead and do lens distortion. One more lens distortion on here, and you can do something called, you know, detect features, okay? And you can say detect. And you can see it's done its best, as you can see. You can also do links and detect. It's going to try to connect the lines. It doesn't really do that well. It doesn't do a good job. It's looking for contrast points from which you can come in and draw the actual lines. The lines are what matters. It's not the features. Features unconnected are not included in the solve. Features that are connected by lines, the lines themselves are what creates the solve. Obviously, you can't establish this lens distortion without an actual line. So that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration. And again, I have, if you want to download this, it's on my Patreon. I don't know what tier you have to get, but just check it out for the VFX Bites. And that's pretty much it. The next lesson, we're going to get into the reality of Maya and Houdini and Overscan and bringing all that data back into our workflow here by using percentages based on how much Overscan we need. So stay tuned.